So existential feeding, what is it?
Hey, I'm Pat Stewart. I'm a dog trainer and coach, and every month I go live for hours answering questions about dog training, life, the universe, and anything else people want to ask. Here's a clip from one of those sessions.
Well, first of all, let's talk about what it's not. It's not starving a dog. It's not feeding a dog shit food that like it barely exists on. That's what some people have in their mind. What is existential feeding is just training a dog with if you intend to train with food, training the dog with the food that would otherwise have gone into its bowl. So existential feeding, it doesn't signify a particular type of food. It doesn't demand anything of you other than that instead of the food going into the bowl and then to the dog, it goes straight to the dog in the training sessions. Why would we do that? Well, first of all, it's calories, right? Like if you intend to train a dog with food, and you're going to feed the dog, chances are you're going to make the dog fat. And it depends on how much you're intending to train the dog. Like if you've got a lot of stuff to train the dog and food is the modality through which you've chosen to do it, then also feeding the dog on top of that is perhaps going to be too much food. Well, the reason that I like to train with existential food when I'm doing it is just exactly that, is that it just gets easier to manage. I know like my dog has its daily food intake and then I've got that, I put it in the pouch and I go, hey, here it is, right? Like this is what we're working for. And I know, okay, you've had your meal now. What you can do with existential food is that if the dog's not a willing participant in the session, then you can sort of somewhat artificially increase the food drive via not giving it the food when it doesn't take the food. What I don't do is ever starve a dog out. What I never want to do is put a dog in a position where it's thinking the only reason I'm engaged in this is because I need to survive, right? Because once you start kicking into that level of survival type thought, the clarity goes out the window, the franticness comes in. Now, training with existential food doesn't need to be that. In fact, it shouldn't be. And the problems that I see from the language that surrounded existential feeding, and certainly, I was a contributor to this. I was, perhaps caused it or was a person who was involved in the causing of it, is that people who are leveraging their dogs way too hard for food to the point where the dog is genuinely concerned whether it's going to get enough food to survive. And that should never be a thought in the dog's mind. The dog should know, like, that you're going to get, my friend, right? Like, you're going to be fine. But big part of it is convincing your dog that, you got to take this food in this location and at this time. Now, that's the benefit of existential feeding, is that if you come to a training facility. Now, most training facilities have had 1 million dogs in there that have pissed on the floor, and there's a lot of interesting things going on to the dog. And when people try and feed their dog or use food to train at that point, and the dog's not interested in it, if you then go home and feed the dog, then the dog's learned, well, okay, there's no need to take food there because I'll get food later at a different time. I'll get fed from my bowl. So the point of existential feeding is to say to the dog, like, hey, here it is, take it or leave it. I'm not going to force you to take food. I'm not going to shove this down your throat, but I'm also not going to make you hungry so that you will perform here, giving you the opportunity. And if you don't want to take this food, that's totally fine, but I'm not going to give you that food later on. And unfortunately, we can't have that conversation with the dog. They have to just find that out. So for me, if I offer the dog food and it doesn't take it, assuming that the dog's not freaking out and is not shut down and if the dog's just like, no, I'm busy, I don't want that food now, then I go, okay, no problem, but I'm not feeding you later on. And my next session, I need to try and replicate this session so that you learn under these conditions, when I offer you food, you should take it because there's no other food. If you don't get an opportunity to do that, if you can't then reset and try again the next day under similar or the same conditions, then you won't have the learning outcome, right? The dog won't learn, oh, I should take it there. The dog will learn, I'll just get it somewhere else at a different time, right? So that's the point of existential feeding, is that first of all, we're controlling calories, we're keeping your dog more healthy, but also it's if food becomes the thing that we want to train with. And there's times when that's appropriate. There's dogs that's appropriate for, but there's times we're training with food, depending on what you're teaching, the location, there's a lot of things that go into that. But if food is the appropriate thing to be training with what is the dog's actual meal will help keep the dog more engaged. And it will also show the dog like, hey, this is the opportunity. When I ask you to do something, I need you to do it now because this is the opportunity this is when and where I need it to happen, but I'll pay you with food. And if the dog doesn't want that food, it's not going to be likely to do the thing. And the only answer to that then becomes compulsion, right? Like there has to be a way to compel the dog to do it if you're just strictly training with food. Now, the other thing that people misinterpret about existential food is that that's the only way you can train a dog. Like if you're training with existential food, then that's all you're allowed to do. You're not allowed to play. You're not allowed to do anything else. Like that's nonsense as well. If you're training with existential food, it means you can do all the other stuff. So for me, I've got 2 puppies on the go at the moment. Me and Jazz have these 2 puppies. They're on existential food, but it's because they're puppies. We have to monitor. Food goes in, food comes out. We're crate training them, all these sorts of things. I want to be in control of what they eat. I want to monitor what they eat and when. First of all, to make sure that they are eating enough and appropriately so that I know when they're going to need to crap and I can crate train them and toilet train them and get all the things done that I need to get done for these puppies. But also what I'm showing them is like, you dial in on me when I give you the opportunities to dial in on me. And I'm not going to take a puppy to a place where it's not going to want the food. I'm going increments, right? So we had them in here just the other day. They came, it's club night. They come down, they do their training session. They're like for bite work. They're super into it because they're really high prey dogs. And then their second session is they come down with this expectation of like, I'm going to do that. And there's all these people around and we go, no, you're just going to engage with Jazz and you're going to just like lock onto her and you're going to follow her around eating. We film the whole thing. We'll probably in the next video, probably put out a video of a snippet of it where she's got him on leash and she's just like, hey, here's the food. Do you want it? And they're kind of like, yeah, I'm into it. And she just doesn't let them do anything else, right? And so then they take the food because they can't do anything else. And then over a couple of minutes, she gets to the point where she can now take the leash off and now they're choosing that engagement with her. And that's through existential food because the dog's like, well, I'm hungry. This is my dinner. It was their dinner, right? So they're actually hungry. And with puppies, they need to eat like every, 6-8 hours, something like that. So you get all these opportunities to train. You don't ever have to withhold from a dog. Then a puppy will get hungry very, very quickly and you can give it this illusion of scarcity very easily. So that's my sort of rant on existential feeding. That's what it is. And I think what I've seen is people just over leveraging dogs too much. So I see people who are like anti existential feeding that are just like, yeah, I won't train with food because they're fucking idiots, to be honest. But there are definitely people who take it way too far. There are people who have the dogs too leveraged for it. And some of those people, they've never actually starved their dog. It's not like their dog has ever really gone into, like a serious deficit or been unwell, but just they keep the dogs at a razor's edge where the dog's always thinking about food and thinking it needs to perform in order to do it. And especially if you're asking for tasks, especially if you're shaping, you can create a lot of franticness and hecticness and this over offering of behaviors that's very maladaptive and not conducive to good training. So training with existential food, is it a good thing to do? Like, yeah, it can definitely result in some high quality training. And if you're going to train with food, you may as well train with the food that the dog will eat because he has to have those calories, right? But I think that there are people who take it too far and there are times that it's not conducive to good training. So you have to be careful of it, okay? What I don't want is to give a dog like big feelings about food if it doesn't already have them. Some dogs come like that. Like they're resource guarders, whatever. But I don't want a dog to have big feelings, be scared of not taking food or taking food or missing an option, like all that kind of stuff. I don't want a dog in that level of anxiousness around food. But I certainly do want to be able to use food to motivate the dog.
If you like that video, consider subscribing to the channel. There's new stuff coming out all the time. And if you want to ask a question on one of those live streams, you can do that by joining the Patreon of my podcast, which is called The Canine Paradigm. The link's in the description. Here's the playlist of a bunch of other questions being answered.